From Tokyo, Japan and Auckland, New Zealand, this is Down to Business English with your hosts, Montreux and Samantha Vega.
Let me get this straight, Samantha.
Sure, Skip. What would you like to clear up?
Since you and I last spoke, the entire world has been engulfed by a pandemic that has wreaked havoc on the basic fiber of human existence. Does that pretty well sum everything up?
Well, that might be a little overly dramatic, but yes. COVID-19 has had a global impact since our last D2B episode together.
It really is unbelievable what has transpired.
I know. Entire countries shut down, economies devastated, unemployment rates skyrocketing. Unprecedented is a word that has been used often to describe these times. One can't help but feel a bit uneasy by it all.
It definitely is a brave new world, so to speak.
A brave new world? That is a very optimistic way to look at it. I might not go that far.
Oh, how would you describe it?
I see it more like uncharted waters.
I can go along with that synopsis. So, what is your situation anyway? New Zealand is one country that seems to be managing to keep the coronavirus infection rate down.
That's true, but the country has had to take some serious steps to accomplish that. Myself, along with the majority of the working population, were in lockdown since March 25th and working from home. I just returned to the workplace May 18th.
Just under 2 months. As long as that sounds, it is not as bad as some places in Europe.
You can say the same for Japan, considering the size of the population. What's going on over there now?
Well, the Abe government, under immense pressure from the governors of Tokyo and Osaka, finally declared a state of emergency back in early April. At first, it was supposed to last until May 6th, but has now been extended until the end of May. But as we are recording this, there are news reports that it might be lifted earlier, maybe even later today.
And so was everything locked down like here in New Zealand? We could only go to the hospital, supermarkets, and corner shops, and that was about it.
Nowhere close. Even under this so-called state of emergency, the government could not legally compel companies to close. The best they could do was request that people reduce physical contact with others by 70 to 80%.
And everyone complied?
For the most part, I would have to say yes. The office I work in, for example, we didn't close. Instead, management asked employees to work from home on a rotating basis. In that way, everyone was able to reduce their commute times and their exposure to other people. I've been going into the office for 2 or 3 days a week.
And what about your teaching schedule? I can't imagine your clients letting you visit their offices to hold English classes.
No, all of that has been transitioned online. I've spent the last month getting very comfortable teaching on Zoom, Google Hangouts, and Microsoft Teams.
Wow, the trifecta of video conferencing software.
Well, I am not going to complain. Unlike so many companies, our business product is somewhat transferable to an online environment.
That is fortunate. But as the COVID-19 pandemic has become the new normal, the whole ballgame of doing business has changed, even with the economy starting to open up.
Yes, both companies and employees are rethinking how they do business and the nature of work.
That sounds like the perfect topic for today's show.
It does, doesn't it? So, let's do it. Let's get D2B, down to business, with COVID-19. 3 ways the coronavirus pandemic is reshaping the way business is done.
The first big change we need to talk about, the one that most of us have been experiencing on a personal level, must be the shift to working at home.
Absolutely. Although the concept of working remotely has been around for ages, it has, until now, mostly been a novel practice.
Or at least it's been the exception rather than the rule.
But not anymore. Once cities around the world started locking down, most companies adopted some type of work-from-home policy.
Some people, like you and me, Skip, have been working remotely in some capacity for years, so the switch was quite natural. But for the vast majority, working from home was a completely new experience.
A whole new way of doing things, I know.
Of course, there was a learning curve associated with video conferencing software and other online production tools.
Tell me about it. I think I have become an expert at using at least 4 different video conferencing platforms: Zoom, Google Meet, Microsoft Teams, WebEx.
Why so many?
A simple case of different clients preferring different platforms.
Well, besides getting used to new online tools, there are a bevy of other issues that working remotely brings up.
For instance,
Time management, the blurring of the line between personal and professional time, maintaining communication with team members and coworkers, dealing with the distractions from family members.
sure, all of those are valid concerns. But on the whole, there are a lot of benefits to working from home.
I agree. I personally love it, and I think that it's the way to go.
And it looks like a lot of companies agree with you. Google, Twitter, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon. Those are just some of the big names that have announced that their employees will have the option of working at home throughout the rest of the year.
But do you notice a common denominator between those establishments?
Of course, they are all tech companies.
So working remotely probably suits a large portion of their workforce. It's not like that for many other companies. The retail industry, hospitality and service industries, tourism, it is impossible to do any of those kinds of jobs at home.
And that is what has led to historic unemployment rates. In the U.S., 20.5 million jobs have disappeared in the last 6 weeks. The number of people out of work has not been this high since the Great Depression of the 1930s. And it is pretty much the same situation in the other G7 economies.
And this leads us to the second big change that coronavirus is bringing. With so many jobs disappearing, people will need to rely more and more on governments in the form of cash handouts and other types of welfare assistance.
Which brings the whole concept of UBI, or Universal Basic Income, back into the spotlight.
That's right, UBI. The idea of everyone getting a guaranteed income from the government.
Originally, the idea of UBI was intended to offset jobs lost to automation and artificial intelligence. But now it is being brought up as a way to keep economies going in this crisis.
But there is an obvious flaw to UBI under these circumstances.
And what would that flaw be?
Well, in a scenario where machines replace humans in the workforce, wealth would still be created. That wealth could then be used to pay for the universal basic income. But in this COVID-19 situation, where industries are collapsing because their market has disappeared, wealth is just being lost.
So the only way for governments to fund UBI schemes would be by going into more debt.
I'm afraid so. I'm all for UBI, but I don't think that it would be very helpful as a long-term solution to dealing with unemployment caused by the COVID-19 pandemic.
And I think you are right. Industries need to open up again, and wealth needs to be created. But until that happens, governments are going to have to support the unemployed.
And I think that is why you are seeing so much effort being put into reopening economies. It will happen, but it's going to take time.
Well, however long it takes, everything is going to be different. And if there is one area where it has become painfully obvious from this pandemic that a change is needed, it is the global supply chain.
There have been many headlines on that topic. The whole concept of just-in-time manufacturing, where supply chains are organized around manufacturers not keeping a large inventory of parts or supplies, is under serious reevaluation.
On the one hand, just-in-time manufacturing is extremely cost-efficient. But on the other, if the supply chain cannot get you your parts because of the pandemic, you are in big trouble.
A lot of organizations are rethinking their dependence on China as a production center. With so many factories being shut down there in the first 3 months of the year, it had a significant impact on the world GDP.
And even though China is now in the process of restarting factories, many companies are looking at other areas of the world to diversify their manufacturing.
Do you think there will be a major move away from doing business in China?
Yes and no. Things are definitely going to change, but China does have a lot going for it in terms of manufacturing.
Well, in the end, this whole pandemic mess is not economically good for anyone.
No, it isn't. But having said that, this crisis, like any crisis, does present business opportunities for some.
As they say, never let a good crisis go to waste.
Do they say that?
Allegedly so.
Well, whatever the case, I think it is time for you and I to get D2V, down to vocabulary.
Down to Business English audio scripts are a great learning tool. Be sure to visit the D2B website and download your free audio script of today's podcast. downtobusinessenglish.com. That's www.downtobusinessenglish.com.
First up on our D2V list today is the very common expression to get something straight. When you say that you want to get something straight, you are communicating that you want to understand something clearly.
Or you want to confirm that your understanding of something is the same as the person you are speaking with.
The very first words out of my mouth at the beginning of today's episode were, "Let me get this straight, Samantha." I was signaling to her that I wanted to check to see if my understanding of something was the same as her understanding.
And I replied by asking, "What would you like to clear up?"
And off we went, exchanging our opinions and impressions on the subject of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Now that I think about it, I use this expression quite often.
Can you give me an example?
Just yesterday, I was having a small disagreement with a coworker.
You in a disagreement? I find that a little hard to believe.
It was very, very minor. Anyway, he was asking me to take care of some tasks that he is responsible for. Normally I wouldn't mind, but I already had a long list of my own things to get done.
And what did you say?
I simply said, "Let me get this straight, John. Not only do you want me to take care of my tasks, you want me to finish yours as well, all by the end of the day?"
And did you say it with the same indignant tone of voice?
I did.
Good for you.
And in the end, he decided to take care of his tasks without any help from me.
Well, let's get something straight between us right now, Samantha.
What's that, Skip?
I would never ask you to do something that I was responsible for.
I hope not.
But the next word on the list is yours, not mine.
So it is. Next, I would like to talk about the idiomatic usage of the noun uncharted waters. When you are in uncharted waters, you're in a situation you have never been in before.
Or you are doing something that you have never done before.
Just as if you were on an ocean voyage and are sailing through an area that has never been mapped.
Or in other words, the area is uncharted and very little is known about it.
In the story, I described the global pandemic as uncharted waters. In other words, we are in a situation that none of us, well, very few of us, have ever experienced.
True enough.
Can you give another example, Skip?
Sure. A mentor of mine, someone who I really respect and admire professionally, found himself in uncharted waters when all of the classes he taught were suddenly put online back in April. He is a little older and not the most tech-savvy person, so teaching on teleconferencing software was new to him.
How did he make out?
I'm very happy to say he made out surprisingly well.
That's very good to hear.
Yes, but I think he was an exception rather than the rule.
The exception rather than the rule? Isn't that your next word?
It is. This noun phrase communicates that some event or some activity is not common or it is unusual.
So your mentor, who was a little older, who did well with all the technology involved in teaching online, His success was not common. Most people his age were not as successful teaching online.
Exactly. And in the story, you commented that before the COVID-19 pandemic, working from home was the exception rather than the rule in many companies. In other words, it was not as common as it is now. Samantha, can you give us a different example from the business world?
Okay. Did you know that 9 out of 10 new restaurants close within 1 year?
I'm not sure that is true, but yes, I have heard that statistic.
So you could say that a restaurant that stays open for longer than 1 year is the exception rather than the rule.
Nice example.
Thanks. I kind of pulled that out of my hat, so to speak. Shall we go on?
By all means. What's the next word?
Next, I want to quickly touch on the noun bevy. A bevy is a large group of something. In the story, I commented that there are a bevy of issues that come with working online.
So in other words, there are many issues.
Yes. You can use bevy to replace many in, well, a bevy of situations. How's that for an example?
Very good. Our final word for D2V today is the noun common denominator. This comes from mathematical fractions.
Like 1/2, 3/4, or 5/8?
Yes. The top number of each of those fractions are called numerators, and the bottom number is referred to as the denominator. So, when two or more things have something in common, you can say they have a common denominator.
In the story, I asked you if you could see the common denominator between the companies who are allowing their employees to continue working from home. And you accurately pointed out that they are all tech companies. That is what they have in common.
I was recently reading an article on the internet that identified common denominators of successful business people.
Oh, and what would some of those be?
In total, they listed 10 qualities that successful business people shared. But the top 2 common denominators were a passion for reading and a strong sense of curiosity in all things.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have guessed either of those, but they make sense if you think about it.
Yes, they do make sense. But I don't think those qualities are important only in business. I think to be successful in anything requires a certain amount of curiosity. And who doesn't like to read?
Would you like to support Down to Business English? Be sure to visit the D2B page in iTunes and subscribe to this show. While you are there, why don't you leave a rating and a comment? This will help D2B reach more people wanting to improve their business English skills. Down to Business English. Business news to improve your business English.
Very nice to speak with you today, Samantha.
You too, Skip. I hope that by the time we prepare the next episode, the whole COVID-19 situation is more under control.
Fingers crossed. But in the meantime, everyone, keep washing your hands.
Yes, and avoid crowded places.
Thanks for listening, everyone. See you next time.
Take care.
Have a comment or question about today's show? Don't be shy. Visit the D2B website or the Facebook page and post any comments or questions there. Skip, Des, or Samantha will be sure to leave a reply. Want to get even more down to business English? Sign up for the D2B newsletter and receive updates on some of the stories covered on Down to Business English. That's www.downtobusinessenglish.com. Down to Business English. Business news to improve your business English.